operation here in the EOC, and the 8th week since I declared a state of emergency here in Greenfield. And yes, what a long, strange trip it's been. The staff here has been remarkably effective and productive when you think of where we were 6 to 8 weeks ago and where we are today. To date, the Emergency Operations Center has distributed over 395 masks, that's cloth masks, to the community. Thank you to everyone who donated masks to us so that we could do that. For all I know, more masks have gone out today, but that was this morning's number. And our resource line has fielded over 587 calls and made 556 referrals. So they have been working very hard as well, and big thanks to them for being able to talk to the community and help them out. We continue to push out PPEs and other supplies to those agencies, organizations, and towns that need them. Most of you probably know this because I think you got a press release, but for the benefit of everyone, the Greenfield Department of Health and I have upgraded our face covering advisory to an order based on the executive order signed last Friday by Governor Baker. The order includes wearing a face mask.
I'm sorry. My daughter changed my ringtone.
The order includes wearing a face mask when in public while conducting essential business, and at those times when physical distancing is unable to be maintained. In Greenfield, this order goes into effect tomorrow, May 6th, until further notice, and supersedes any previous guidance issued by the city. The city of Greenfield will not be issuing any fines to those who do not wear a face covering in public because they don't have one. This order will be enforced by the Greenfield Department of Public Health, or Department of Health, and the Greenfield Police Department as agents of the Department of Health on a case-by-case basis. Residents who are in need of a mask, please call the city's COVID-19 response line, 413-775-6411. As I said, we are giving out masks, and we still have quite a few that we can continue to give out. Let me speak a little bit about the future. We have been working hard as a city to discuss what reopening would look like for Greenfield. I'm continuing to work closely with our department heads, city leadership, and law enforcement to develop a comprehensive plan. And as always, I will seek guidance from the governor's office and the newly formed advisory board under Lieutenant Governor Karen Polito. If all goes accordingly, we will be looking at reopening a few municipal buildings, actually only a couple of municipal buildings, during the week of May 18th. And again, all of this is subject to change because we don't really know what will happen on May 18th. But we're getting prepared, just as we got prepared to move in here weeks before we actually did. To date, we have reviewed new furniture and space configurations for our offices, new capacity limits based on social distancing, and we'll begin installation of plexiglass barriers at public counters. The buildings that we are looking at opening, oh please, Senator, hi, come on up and join us.
Sorry to be late.
That's all right. Thank you for coming. I think I was there just saying we're going to put up plexiglass barriers in our public offices, well, the ones that are public facing. I also want to say a few words about contact tracing because it's really critical, and it hasn't gotten enough play until recently. But I want to tell you about our contact tracing efforts. As you know, the 3 T's of how we get through this and begin to come out the other side are testing, tracing, and treatment. Greenfield has been doing contact tracing since March 18th. We have 3 individuals dedicated to working on this. 2 are RNs, and Jennifer Hoffman is an RN and has a Master's of Public Health. She's around here somewhere. They log about 120 cumulative hours a week. Because of this, we are able to work cases which are not just confirmed positive with a test, but also clinical positives, which are the cases where a test has not yet been performed or come back with the results, but the clinician is reasonably certain it is COVID. So we've been very effective, and I have to credit Jennifer for her excellent relationships with our healthcare institutions around here, including Bay State Hospital. In public health, contact tracing is the process of identification of persons who may have come into contact with an infected person, someone who has COVID-19, has coronavirus, or is suspected of having coronavirus. And then the subsequent collection and other data, further information about those contacts. So how it works, let me see, hopefully I'll get this right. If not, here's Jen. The health department gets a notification of a case, and a member of the team calls the person to get a list of anyone they have had reasonably significant contact with in the last week or so. And I think the definition of reasonably significant is 15 minutes or more. Then they call all of those people. That's what our contact tracers are doing. Those three people, they all happen to be women. Those 3 women logging all those hours. If someone from another town emerges, the team member notifies the town's health department. We do this for every person connected to every case, and we check back with the people as their illness resolves or progresses. We're also working with the FERCOG, which is doing contact tracing throughout the other towns in the county. We had members of the FERCOG here in the EOC until this week. The state's Community Tracing Collaborative was announced April 23rd. We are not working with them since we had our contact tracing apparatus already in place, and it is working well. But we are, of course, working with the State Department of Public Health as well. Now, showtime. I'd like to turn it over to Congressman Jim Mcgovern, who will be giving us an update on the federal response to COVID-19. And Congressman Mcgovern has represented the 2nd Congressional District in Massachusetts since 1997. He's currently the chair of the Rules Committee in Congress. That sounds pretty mundane, I know, but it's also very powerful. And is a senior member of the House Committee on Agriculture's Subcommittee on Nutrition and Oversight. And we know well his advocacy on behalf of people experiencing food insecurity. Something that has grown even more so as we begin to work our way through this pandemic. Congressman Mcgovern is here today to give us an update on the federal response, and at this point I will turn it over to him shortly, and then we can hear from Senator Comerford and Representative Paul Mark, who will be giving us their updates on the ongoing state response to the COVID pandemic. If our guests have a few minutes after, at the end, I'm happy to take questions, and if they can stay to do that, that would be great too. But just let us know. All right, great.
Well, first of all, let me maybe thank Mayor Wedegartner for the incredible job she's doing here in Greenfield. You know, our mayors are on the front lines, and you know, it is challenging on a whole range of levels because this crisis has impacted our entire economy. And I want to thank Roxann for her leadership. I want to thank the staff at the city's Emergency Operations Center. I want to thank the Chief of Police, Robert Haig. I want to thank the Fire Chief, Robert Strahan, the Health Director, Valerie Bird, and the entire Greenfield Health Department. And I want to thank the Greenfield Departments of Public Works and Recreation. And I want to thank my colleagues in the state legislature, Representative Paul Mark, my dear friend, and my other dear friend, Senator Joe Comerford. They are unbelievable, and they are a source of information to my office, and I appreciate their counsel and their guidance. I have been so inspired by how people are coming together to help take care of one another during this crisis. And I want to thank the people of Greenfield and throughout Franklin County for taking this crisis seriously and practicing social distancing, or I like to use the word physical distancing, and all of the CDC guidelines. Keep doing it. I know the weather is getting warmer. I know that we've had some sunny days. I know we're hearing some positive news. Now is not the time to let up. Now is the time to double down. We will beat this virus, and when we do, it will be because of the actions of everyone in our community who are working together to follow CDC guidance and protect their family and friends and look out for one another. You know, when we hear people say flatten the curve is not flattening it by itself. We are flattening it, working together. And we should all take some inspiration in our actions, that our actions are making a difference. Now, let me just say a few words about what's happening where I am. First of all, let me say I'm proud that our local, state, and federal delegation is working together as a team to respond to the needs of our community. And I've had conversations with Roxann since this has begun, so we're all in contact. And that is important. We're all working together. We're a team. And Congress has now passed 4 bills. And I'm proud that the House initiated 2 of them. And I'm proud that we flipped the other 2 from Fortune 500 bailouts into bills that put workers and families first. Money has started flowing, and we hope more money will be on the way. $112,000 for public housing in Greenfield, $130,000 for public housing in Franklin County, $900,000 for Greenfield Community College and GCC students, $633,000 for Community Health Center of Franklin County. My office has also been working with local businesses and lenders to make sure that the Paycheck Protection Program, the PPP program, that Congress set up has been accessible in Greenfield. A number of businesses here have benefited from that program. But I want to make sure that those kinds of businesses benefit while luxury steakhouse chains are not getting money because they don't need it. I introduced and passed in Congress a bill to create an oversight committee to make sure that this money is going to the people who need it. It is modeled after the committee that then Senator Harry Truman led to oversee the monies that were being appropriated by Congress for World War II. Senator Truman wanted to make sure that every cent was going to where it was supposed to go, that it wasn't being siphoned off by special interests, that it wasn't going to efforts that were aimed at helping to win the war. We need to do the same thing now. Congress has appropriated trillions of dollars, and we've read some news articles that some of the money has gone to places that we think are inappropriate. We need to make sure that all the money is going to where it needs to go to. We need transparency, we need accountability, and we need to get it right. We're experiencing a crisis like no other that we have seen in our lifetime. Massachusetts has begun to distribute pandemic unemployment insurance and extra SNAP money to provide for folks who have been laid off as a result of the coronavirus. We're working now on another package, which I hope will be ready in the next week or two. And my priorities in that package are making sure that that people have food, and making sure that small communities are taken care of. You know, we have seen on TV, the long lines of people waiting to get food at food pantries and food banks all across this country. We have seen locally the demand for food increased dramatically. Joe and I were at the Amherst Survival Center a few days ago, and we saw firsthand the enormity of the need. So this next package needs to address that issue, and I hope that it will include enlarging and enhancing the SNAP benefit for people who are struggling during this time. We need to make sure that we continue to aid our small businesses and our workers and our communities hit hardest by this crisis. And we also need to make sure that this next package includes some money for states, cities, and towns, and not just for the bigger cities, but for the smaller and medium-sized ones as well. I mean, the needs in Greenfield, are every bit as important as the needs of any other community in this Commonwealth and in this country. And the financial challenges that the mayor is facing are every bit as real as any other community in this country. So we need to understand that in Congress and make sure that in addition to state money in which the governor can distribute it as he sees fit, in addition to money for big cities in terms of their CDGB monies, we need to make sure that it's coming to places like Greenfield as well.
Please.
And so you have my commitment that we will do that. And again, we're going to get through this. And I am really proud of those who have followed the guidelines, those who are taking the advice of the mayor, and I'm proud of this community. Again, the mayor has done a great job, and our state legislators have been outstanding. But the whole team that I mentioned at the beginning, I do want to thank them, and I look forward to working with you in the coming days and weeks. But we need to get through this. I'm going to just say one final thing, if I could. One of the things that this pandemic has illustrated is the inequities and inequality in this country. And our challenge, quite frankly, is not just to get through this emergency, which we're going to have to do, but it cannot be about returning to the status quo. I mentioned this issue about food insecurity and hunger. Even before this happened, we had too many people in our community here who didn't know where the next meal was going to come from. We had 40 million people in this country who didn't know where the next meal was going to come from. So we don't want to return to the status quo. As we respond to this emergency, we want to come back and we want to fix some of these inequalities that existed even before. And so I look forward to working with this team here, and I'll turn this over to Senator Comerford.
Thank you so much, Congressman. Thank you, Mayor Wedegartner, and thank you to everyone in this command center for your stellar work. I'm really happy to represent Greenfield with Representative Paul Mark and Congressman Mcgovern, and really, really delighted to be with you here today to talk about what the state can and should be doing. I want to begin by saying, really doubling down on what the Congressman just said about the fact that we can't go back to normal or the status quo before this pandemic was really rife with the inequities that are completely exposed now in the middle of this pandemic and the economic crisis. We have to build back to a better Commonwealth, certainly a better Western Massachusetts, and the kind of leadership shown here in Greenfield is just the kind of leadership we need. So the state's been involved in trying to be as good a partner to the federal government as possible, certainly an ally to local municipal officials. We've moved money to communities, largely to the healthcare sector. To date, about $1.8 billion in money that's either been advanced or moved around in the state budget or directly appropriated. Again, that's largely been through the healthcare sector. The legislature has passed a variety of bills, some together with House and Senate, some in individual chambers that we still have to work hard across the chambers, and we do that well out here in Western Massachusetts, sometimes not as well in Boston, to be able to pass, but we've certainly put together a moratorium on evictions and foreclosures. Both chambers now have an expansive unemployment expansion. If passed, it would be one of the most expansive in the nation. It would add weeks, it would add more money for dependents. We're passing bills for our municipal officials to make it possible to govern In the time of crisis, it's dramatically hard to govern a city or town when everything is remote. They've been doing miraculous work. We have to make it easier for them to do that work. And now we have to think toward reopening. So the governor has put together a reopening advisory board. Both Representative Mark and I are concerned with the makeup of that board. Perhaps Mark will say more to that, but let me just say that I'm sending a letter both about the contents of that board and also the kinds of issues I'm hoping that the governor will consider, including a regional differential to what's needed, including adequate testing and PPE and contact tracing in regionally equitable ways so that we here in Western Massachusetts have the tools we need to reopen and an understanding of our economies that are different from the understandings of the Eastern economies. So that's the piece of work that's ahead of us, even as we do the kind of work that the mayor and Congressman Mcgovern were saying in terms of keeping public health front and center so that we continue to honor those in the essential workforce, those healthcare workers who are on the front lines by staying home, by practicing social distancing guidelines, and as we emerge, practicing every single public health protocol that's indicated by the federal and state governments. That's the way we can say thank you to those on the front lines. That's the way we can honor the essential workforce that's been responding and keeping us safe. And let me also just say two other things. One is that the state will begin and has begun a budget process for this fiscal year. It's going to be up to all of us in both chambers to work as creatively and collaboratively as possible, both across the gap in the state budget that's current, which is why the federal stimulus is so profoundly needed. We have to pass a balanced budget in Massachusetts, so we rely on amazing champions like Jim Mcgovern to be able to advocate for the kind of money that this pandemic mixed with an economic gut punch deserves and needs. And then we're going to look at the fiscal year 21 budget. And we're going to have to be incredibly strong here in Western Massachusetts. And I'm glad we have a dean. We call Paul the OG of the delegation, to be able to lock arms and really fight for the kinds of priorities that are important to Western Massachusetts in the midst of such fiscal deficits. We're going to have to be more creative, more strategic than ever to make sure that our communities get the kind of resources they need and deserve. So that's the next big leaps forward that we're going to have to take in addition to the legislation, is to be able to take in the federal money that's coming, and again is so important, mix it with state funds and chart a course with our municipal leaders that makes sense for the whole Commonwealth, certainly, but especially for here in Western Massachusetts. And the other thing that we have to do, and I will lead this work for the Senate as the chair of the Senate working group that's been responding, we have to really do proper oversight in all of the areas that we know have been deeply affected. So for example, I will do another public health oversight committee hearing. I held one on March 5th, talking about how we were preparing for this pandemic, seeing it on the horizon. We now have to understand all of the things that we did as a Commonwealth to respond and work through what was effective, what was not effective, what we have to do now. Part of what we have to do now is build up rural public health. I know the Senate chair of the Committee on Education will hold an education oversight hearing along with the House chair to talk about remote learning, who's benefiting, who's being left behind. That's the kind of painstaking work we're going to have to do as we build back to better than normal, better than the status quo. And I look forward to doing it with my partners in the legislature here, my municipal partners, like the mayor and certainly Congressman Mcgovern. Thank you so much. And now I'll turn it over to Paul Mark.
Thank you very much. Thank you for allowing me to participate remotely like this. It's amazing. If you told me a year ago that I'd have to buy a tripod to set up in my car so that I could make any of these meetings and such work, I would have thought you were way off, and I can't believe that that's something. I'd like to thank Senator Comerford, my partner in representing Greenfield and a lot of Franklin County, for her great work. Modesty won't allow a lot of my colleagues here to say these things, but Joe is basically in charge of the Senate's response to this crisis in Massachusetts. And so when we have calls of the entire legislature with our commander, Mary Lou Sutters, the Secretary of Health and Human Services, on these calls, Joe is always there kicking it off and leading. And to be able to do that in a first term like this is just unbelievable. And I think a testament to how prepared she was for this job and how much work she puts into doing this job every single day. And it's a great honor to partner with her. Congressman Mcgovern, another one, as chair of the Rules Committee, one of the most important people down there in the House of Representatives in Washington. And boy, Joe mentioned how in Boston we're putting aside a lot of partisan differences. And I would say in Washington, they have a much tougher time with that. But under the circumstances, I think they are actually doing an outstanding job. I think it's about as politically neutral as you can get under these politically charged times. And to see Congressman Mcgovern leading that, and with the rest of the Massachusetts delegation in both the House and the Senate, has been outstanding. And the stimuluses that are happening, they are so crucial to our state and local governments. And so thank you, Congressman, for your work on that and for the fight that you're continuing and leading. And then to Mayor Wedegartner, we talked a year ago, and I told you, the good news is you're going to win. The bad news is your first 6 months are going to be dominated by a state of emergency. I don't know, maybe you wouldn't have run, but I'm glad you did, because I think you're doing an outstanding job under the circumstances. Again, walking into a crisis like this and being able to lead a community like this and keep things under control is just outstanding. It's an honor to partner with you as well. So thank you all for doing this and having me. A couple of updates I want to give from Massachusetts House of Representatives. Number one, as Senator Comerford mentioned, we're looking to get into the budget process, and we're looking to get into a lot more of a legislative process than we've been able to do. We've been holding sessions under our Constitution. We have to have a session every 72 hours, and we've been able to pass a lot of important things in a really short timeline. But the trick has been, up to this point, we've been able to do everything with unanimous consent. So at this moment, up to now, if one member of the House or one member of the Senate doubted a quorum or voiced objections, any bill would die. So again, it's a great example and testament to how well people have been working together. We've been able to pass wide-ranging legislation covering school, covering foreclosures, covering local aid, covering public health, with the cooperation of 160 members of the House, 40 members of the Senate, and the governor is really important, that we put aside any differences to make sure things work for Massachusetts. But now tomorrow, for the first time in the 390-year history of the Massachusetts General Court, we are going to have a session of the House where we are allowed to vote remotely. Now, of course, it doesn't work for me because of where I live. I have to go into Boston to be able to vote and participate. But we're going to vote tomorrow on legislation that will allow our governor and our treasurer to borrow money to make sure that, in light of the extension of the income tax deadline from April 15th to July 15th, to make sure that we don't have any cash flow problems, to make sure people that we're paying, whether they're employees or whether they're different agencies or payments that we are making out for equipment and different things that are needed by Massachusetts, that there is sufficient cash flow to keep us going. This is a move that's going to help us, maintain a strong bond rating, that's going to allow us to borrow and make sure that we are paying and keeping services going for as many people in the state as possible. And then it's going to allow us, with the formal sessions, to be able to vote remotely and be able to work on a budget. And the good news is we will have a budget. It will be a budget that takes care of the people and addresses the needs of our communities and all of our residents as best as possible. And the bad news is, though, we're looking at a significant hit in revenue. I mean, we all know what's going on right now. We all know businesses have had to shut down, rightfully so, but have had to do this, and employees, a lot of people are out of work right now, and that's going to take a toll on the revenue coming into our state. Great time for that to happen. The world literally was falling down. Oh my God. So anyway, it's going to be a tough budget season, and everyone needs to be prepared for that. We're going to be as creative as we can to keep things going and to keep things as going as well as possible. And we're going to be turning to our federal delegation a lot to make sure that we have the resources we need. But we're all going to be in it together, and we're all going to need to pull together, and we have been doing so, and we're going to continue to do so. Something important that is a specialty of mine at the moment is the census. So I'm chair of the redistricting committee, and in anticipation of the U.S. Census that has to happen under the Constitution in 2020, we have spent the last couple of years really prepping for the census and getting out the word that the census is important. It's important to fill out. It affects our representation in Boston and in Washington and in the Electoral College as well that votes for the president. So it's important for our political voice and our political power, but it's also important in terms of money that is allocated. Over $675 billion is allocated federally by the census numbers. And there are hundreds of state and federal programs that rely on these census numbers. I imagine those numbers are going to get even higher depending on what kind of stimulus programs and what kind of relief programs are needed once this crisis comes to a head and as we begin a recovery phase. The estimate right now was every person that doesn't fill out the census costs their community $2,300 a year for the next 10 years. I imagine that number is actually going to get higher, and we don't get another shot at this until 2030. So the numbers we get right now this year really matter. As an update, the census has delayed its operations. The field operations are going to begin on June 1st.
Assistants took account today. Greenfield's at 67%. Ah, you're back.
I'm back, better than ever.
Fabulous.
The last thing I was going to say is that the field operations for the census have been delayed. They're going to start on June 1st. So if you haven't received a mailing yet, don't worry about it. It's going to happen. It's just it can't be done safely at this point. But some people need a final wave of mailings is going to go out, and some people need the census materials actually brought physically to their address because they don't have maybe postal pickup at their home address. You can still, though, regardless, fill it out by online or by telephone. And the census has changed its website so that if you have not received the invitation respond, you can still fill it out, but you can do it without the unique code, and they will figure it out. So the deadline to respond has been extended to October 31st, but please, if you can fill it out sooner than that, that would be great. And sorry again for the technical issues and such, but thank you for having me here, and thank you, everybody.
Greenfield census, Keith took a count today, so we're up to 67%, which is not near high enough. 2010 it was 74. So come on, people. If you live in Greenfield, please fill out your census. You have until October 31st, but no, sooner rather than later. Thank you. So we'll be happy to take some questions if you have any. Sam.
Hi, Sam Wood from the Montague Reporter. I was just wondering if there's any discussion of rent or mortgage relief programs?
The question is there any discussion of a rent or mortgage relief program or a freeze? And are you addressing that to
Representative Mcgovern?
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, there is discussion about it, you know, but we're at the point now where I can't give you any certainty as to whether that'll be addressed in the next package. Right now, all the chairs of the relevant committees are taking the information and guidance from the members of their committee, and they're presenting them to our leadership, and we're going to try to come up with a draft of a bill. But I know Congressman Ilhan Omar has introduced a bill to freeze rents and mortgages. And I think, you know, we need to be open to looking at, you know, whether that's a possibility. There's another issue we're looking at. Congresswoman Jayapal of Washington State, I'm working with her on, is a bill that would provide have the federal government cover salaries directly, so we keep people basically tied to their job rather than having them apply for unemployment insurance. Other countries, Germany's doing this. Other countries in Europe are doing it. It seems to be working, you know, with the desired result. But look, I mean, everything needs to be on the table because this is a crisis that is like no other crisis we've ever seen, and it impacts every aspect of our economy. I mean, you just heard here today about some of the issues. So I just think, you know, whether we can do it or not, I don't know. I mean, we have to not only deal with the House, we have to deal with Mitch McConnell in the Senate and Donald Trump in the White House, and you know, I mean, that's not the ideal group to have to deal with, but I think this is a time to think out of the box and to put everything on the table, and let's have these discussions. We shouldn't be afraid to have these discussions.
This might be better addressed to Senator Comerford or Representative Mark. Is there any discussion of fast-tracking broadband challenges, especially in Western Mass, given the need for remote work and remote education?
Both of you.
I'm happy to talk a little bit first.
Yeah.
Yeah, the MBI has, first of all, been putting in Wi-Fi hotspots in some of the towns. So I know one's going in Hawley, one's going in the town of Savoy, to try to make towns that haven't quite got where they need to be yet up to speed and giving people a chance to compete. Senator Comerford and I and the entire delegation, we've really been pushing for something like this, because when you talk about students, whether they're K through 12 or higher education, some students from towns like Peru, where I live, they're not all going to be on equal footing with their peers, because we need to move to a remote format, but it's much more difficult when you don't have that access to broadband in your house. So it is something that we're working on with MBI, and if Senator Comerford has anything to add, that would be wonderful.
I would just add to what Rep. Mark just said, is that there's certainly active conversations, as Rep. Mark indicated, and a look at the kind of ways we could perhaps repurpose some federal money into Massachusetts for this last push. Although, lots needs to be better understood about the CARES Act and then subsequent stimulus, about how and when we can spend them and on what. But certainly it's not lost on us, especially out here in Western Massachusetts, that the inequities faced by this crisis are faced in more acute terms by those communities without the resources to work remotely or go to school remotely. So it's been a front and center issue for us.
And I should also say that in the next package that Congress is dealing with, this issue of broadband is also front and center.
Yeah.
And we're trying to make that part of the package as well. So hopefully that'll be some direct assistance to the states to help them accomplish as quickly as possible what we all want.
Some communities have developed business loan programs for their small businesses. I know there's a federal program that hasn't really trickled down to small businesses in this area. I'm wondering, does Greenfield have any plans to put together their own municipal package to help small business owners, especially in the downtown area?
Absolutely. We've actually done it already. MJ Adams, our Economic Development Director, and CDBG Wiz is working with the Franklin County CDC to put together a small business loan package of forgivable loans for our micro businesses, our micro enterprises primarily, but small businesses as well. What we're waiting for is a little bit of a boost from additional CDBG money coming out of the CDBG CARES Act. And where it stands now is we're a non-entitlement city, so we haven't received our money yet. HUD has to release the money to the state, DHCD. It gets wonky here, and they haven't done that yet. So we are, with Senator Comerford's help and Representative Paul Mark's help, the city of Greenfield is leading the charge, and we are asking other mayors and non-entitlement companies in Western Massachusetts to come along with us to pressure DHCD to give us the money sooner rather than later once they receive it. But they can't give us anything they don't have yet. So I don't know if Congressman Mcgovern has a hotline to HUD or knows what the status of that might be, but if he does, I'm all ears.
We will work with you on that matter. But it goes to the point I said before, which is this next package needs to understand that it's not just the big cities that need assistance. It's the smaller and medium-sized cities and smaller towns that need help too. And so this next package needs to help bypass the bureaucracy that we have to deal with right now and provide direct assistance to communities like Greenfield. So we will work with you on the current money that may be available, but this next package needs to be more direct in terms of its assistance.
I have one more question regarding federal aid, and it actually has to do, I'm sorry, Senator.
No worries.
It has to do with the city's status as a sanctuary city. The president has sort of made a thinly veiled threat that cities and communities that have declared themselves sanctuary communities may not be eligible for certain funding, as unconscionable as that sounds. I wonder if you're concerned about that, Mayor and Congressman. How do you respond to that?
Well, I haven't had time to think about that. I'm too busy trying to figure out just how to keep our city together and economically viable after this is over. you know, we are what we are. I stand by the executive order, and we will just deal with whatever comes our way.
I would say ignore him.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not even, I'm not even sure he can do what he's threatening to do, but ignore him. I mean, we have important matters that we need to deal with right now, and that is the safety and well-being of everybody in our community. And we cannot allow him to sidetrack us and take us down pathways that, quite frankly, he tries to take us down to for his political advantage. Look, I mean, every single human being needs to be treated with respect. We're in a pandemic. We need to make sure that we're all in this together. So just ignore him.
Did you want to say something else on the
Well, I just
CDBG?
wanted to build on the great leadership of Greenfield, MJ Adams, and Mayor Wedegartner to both advocate for the mini entitlement CDBG funds, and also, of course, Congressman McGovern's pushing them out of Washington. I would say that I joined with Rep. Mark in a letter to Undersecretary Jennifer Maddox to say, once that money comes in to Massachusetts, let's get it to our towns equitably and quickly. We don't need a formal bureaucratic application process that's laden with complexities that frankly our town officials just don't have time for. This money is taxpayer money. It's coming from our federal government. It needs to go to the communities that deserve it, and it needs to go immediately with no hoops or strings attached. And that, we sent that letter today in partnership, and certainly Greenfield's on the list. Amherst is also part of this, and we're all waiting for this money so that economic leaders like MJ and the mayor can do the work they need to do to keep communities surviving.
Yeah, very quickly, what are the two buildings that you're going to be opening first?
There are sectors of our economy that have been hit very brutally. For example, hair salons can't access the Paycheck Protection Program. They can't access unemployment. What is being done for those sectors of our economy?
Well, you ask a question that's near and dear to my heart. My husband's not a hairstylist, but he is a massage therapist and has been for over 30 years with a very active practice. Right now he's working in the garden because he can't practice. And so I'm hoping that when we reopen, and it's my message to the advisory board, that we figure out a way to open the personal care services businesses first, because they're the businesses that can control who comes into their establishment, how many people are in there, and so forth. I don't mean to say they won't be changing the way they're going to do business. They are. But these are people that, yes, are mostly single owner businesses, one person. Maybe they have someone they employ part-time from time to time. What are we doing? That's what I'm talking about when I talk about this small business CDBG and CDC and CDBG, Greenfield CDBG funding of program that we're looking at. Those would be called the micro enterprises that we have, but we need the money. Okay, great. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for keeping